Good afternoon, and welcome to our final session of the day. But before we begin this final session, I want to take a moment and I want to thank all the experts, all the panelists that have shared their insight and wisdom here today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to impose on everyone watching here to just put something in the comments about what you thought of our panelists and our presenters today. Just one word or a note, and we'll make sure we share them with everyone. So thank you for that. And just a last time, a plug to complete the survey as well, because we will use this to expand our program services for all of you in the future. So let's get to it. Our topic is recruitment and retention, which, as I don't have to tell you, is an incredibly important question on everyone's mind. And that's really why we're closing the day with this session. When we look back on the 2020 Western New York Diversity and Inclusion Business Community Assessment, it's clear that the issue of recruitment and retention is foremost in the minds of employers. Across all industries served, profit, not-for-profit, every kind of industry, respondents expressed a heavy focus on recruitment of minority candidates as being the most important part of their DEI initiatives at their workplace. Of the Western New York companies reporting that they've begun their diversity and inclusion journey, 53% report this is a critical issue for this group, and it's their #1 area of interest and commitment. Of companies that have not yet started a formal DEI journey, 56% rated this as a top concern, just behind the idea of getting started with a formal DEI program. Who are these companies trying to recruit? According to the assessment, responding companies are heavily focused on entry-level positions. This focus on employment level extends to higher positions as well, but at a slightly lower rate. Findings also show that very small companies, those between 6 and 10 employees, are significantly less likely to focus DEI efforts at mid-level and senior level positions compared to those companies of between 11 and 50 employees. The assessment also revealed that all companies, regardless of size or where they are in their DEI journeys, have a need to increase training and to initiate activities that foster inclusion in the organization. And we heard that today from our presenters about sort of the deliberate intent to really move that forward within an organization. Additionally, the perceptions of CEOs were far rosier in this regard. Nearly 55% of CEOs believed they had created activities that fostered inclusion, yet only 11% of employees agreed. And it goes without saying that recruitment and retention go hand in hand. There are many issues and perceptions around the issue of recruitment and retention, and we're going to touch on a few of them today. And we hope that this roundtable will give you tangible ideas of how to approach this challenge within your organization. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by a panel that represents local companies that are making real progress in this regard. And let me introduce you to our panelists now. First, meet Kristy Farrell, the Director of Diversity and Inclusion with M&T Bank. Kristy's responsibilities include supporting the DEI vision, leading work streams on unconscious bias, developing diverse talent, and communicating efforts across the organization. Previous responsibilities at M&T include managing the employee experience, talent management, and leadership development process, and serving as a senior HR business partner. Thank you for being here, Kristy. Danielle Bozich is Director of Talent Acquisition and Training with ECMC, the Erie County Medical Center. As an HR professional with over 15 years experience, Danielle currently oversees recruitment, training, and employee development for ECMC. The University, spelled Y-O-U in caps, University on the end, is ECMC's first non-clinical training department, established in 2018, and it offers 20 training opportunities that focus on topics such as unconscious bias, cultural competency, and health literacy, microaggressions, anti-racism, and anti-toxicity in the workplace. Welcome Chantele Thompson, the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer of Child and Family Services. In this role, Chantele is responsible for design and implementation of the data-driven diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, broadening the organization's reach into the community, strengthening local partnerships, and ultimately improving client outcomes. As part of the inclusive and holistic approach to employee retention, DEI efforts are enhanced by the organization's employee assistance program. So you can see we've got a marvelous panel here with us today, and let's all get started on this again as we begin this discussion. I know it's tempting to start with recruitment. We just got done talking about how hot a topic that is, but let's talk about retention first and how that relates to creating a culture of inclusion. I'd like you all briefly to share your organizational philosophy regarding inclusion, and can you outline for the audience specific initiatives that you've undertaken to create a culture of inclusion? So Kristy, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Thanks so much, Dottie, and thanks so much for having me this afternoon. Inclusion is every bit as important, if not more important, than diversity itself. We could bring, as many diverse individuals and their perspectives and the value that they could bring to the organization. And if we're not focused on inclusion, the individuals are going to leave. That will take care of the retention, and they won't be able to contribute, and we will not get the full value as an organization with those individuals. So inclusion really is about bringing those diverse perspectives together and ensuring that voices are heard and that they matter. Everybody wants to ensure that they're heard. So some of the initiatives that we have undertaken, and it's an evolving process. It's going to always be evolving. We've engaged in an employee engagement survey for about 20 years now, listening to our employees. That's really the top thing, I think, to really drive inclusion, is asking our employees what's important, listening to them, and then ensuring that we're meeting those needs. We also launched resource groups in 2009, and those are employee-driven groups that focus on a commonality. They share, they help us reach business community. They do training, learning, and development for their members. They also bring together cultural festivities. Our African American Resource Group, for example, is planning a company-wide Juneteenth event in 2 weeks. So the resource groups really can help create that sense of belonging. And then a couple of years ago, we launched an annual performance objective around diversity and inclusion. And one of the behaviors that we outlined really asks each of us to reach out to someone who we may not naturally reach out to, someone who's a bit different than us, to get to know them, to listen to them, to seek their perspective on something when maybe we hadn't sought their perspective before. And that really helps build the culture of inclusion. We've taken that APO as we've redone our diversity strategy and done what we call journey mapping. As we're focused on being more customer-centric and being more employee-centric, we're really listening to employees in a much more structured process so that we can meet their needs better. And those are some of the ways that we're really trying to drive an inclusive culture.
That's excellent. And it looks like, it looks like just on here on the face of it, that there's a lot of data that you can collect through that process, which will be helpful. We'll talk about measurement in a minute. Chantele, why don't you share with us what you're doing at Child and Family?
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. So at Child and Family Services, we really define inclusivity as being the act of creating environments where any individual or group really feels not only just welcomed, but where they feel valued and supported. And they really have the tools that they need to fully participate in what we're doing. And so I like to say that inclusion is something that folks can feel. While diversity, those are metrics and you can count that, inclusion is something that you can feel. Some of the things that we're doing, echoing what Kristy mentioned, is our employee engagement survey. We opened the top of the year with our employee feedback to really get a handle or a feel for what our employees think about our inclusion efforts and how they feel in our organization. And not only collecting employee feedback through formal survey process, but also collecting employee feedback just through general conversation, really making sure that we reach out from a leadership level to have conversations with our employees to see how they're feeling. In addition to that, through all of our organization, we rolled out our DEI 101, which really is like a foundational training for every single one of our staff so that they can get an understanding of how their particular roles impact creating environments of inclusion. And then we also recognize that direct supervisors really influence an employee's daily environment and really have an impact on how an employee experiences the organization. And so we're really doing some concentrated and focused efforts with our direct managers to help build some of their inclusion skills and supervisory and leadership skills.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And, we oftentimes hear at the partnership that, the CEOs will be fully committed to something, and it's not just DEI, it's whatever it is. And that oftentimes things, get lost as they go down the chain. So it's great to hear that you're focused on managers as well. Danielle, I want you to chat, but I want to share a little bit something that you shared with me about ECMC. ECMC has a reputation in the community of being an inclusive workplace, and I know Tom Quattrochi, your CEO, who's on our board, values DEI, but you all have an additional challenge there in that your hiring practices are impacted by the fact that you have to hire many of your positions off of a civil service list. So this is really an interesting additional challenge, I think, in terms of how you create a culture of inclusion at ECMC. So maybe you could talk about your organizational philosophy and what the other folks here have mentioned as well, what you do within the organization.
Sure. So yes, Dottie, you're 100% right. Having that extra civil service layer, civil service exams definitely creates a unique recruitment challenge. But we have tried and partnered with diversity, equity, and inclusion and our community partners to roll out some more information on civil service. What is civil service? How do you get signed up for civil service exam alerts? What does it mean, this rule of three? And really promoting that a little bit more and making sure that people are aware of how you get positions here at ECMC through that civil service process. And I want to take a step back too. We had talked about retention, and Dottie, I'm so glad that we're starting with retention, because retention really is such a good indicator of an employee's feeling of belonging in an organization. So some of the initiatives, in addition to recruitment, some of the initiatives that we've really taken on the retention side of things are focusing heavily on making sure that the people that we're hiring are happy in their position. So one thing is, in addition to exit interviews, when they're already decided that they're leaving, we've implemented stay interviews so that the conversation doesn't stop on the recruitment side. Once someone goes through the orientation process, we touch base with them at certain increments throughout their first year. So 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, to make sure that they are feeling included, that this is an environment that they're happy in, that the position is what they expected. We're also really trying to grow our current employees. And that is through, looking at bridge programs, what certifications, what licenses, what education can we provide for our employees to take their career to the next level. So I will say that we've been lucky enough to start a CNA program here. So we partnered with Bozich as well as Gerard Place to roll out a CNA program for our current employees, fully paid for by our foundation. And we looked at some of the other factors that may prevent people from being successful in a program like this. One of which is, losing wages when you go to better yourself. Location. So being able to partner with Gerard Place, having this right around the corner. In addition to that, we paid them for the time that they are in class. So it takes away that piece of perhaps losing wages during that whole trying to get certification and an education and bettering yourself.
That's really interesting, and I think remarkable, really. And I think when we talk about this challenge, and you heard the data, people are trying to recruit for entry-level positions, and particularly where the first level of wage isn't all that hot. If we have people who are coming into our organizations and we want to move them along a career path, oftentimes what gets in the way of that is if they're receiving some form of benefit, and the potential of losing that gets in the way of them advancing. I mentioned it earlier about the benefits calculator that we're working on, but this, we can't overlook that as just a practical reality of rational decision making and what people do. So let's talk about recruitment and the challenge that we hear. Respondents to our assessment remark it's hard to find diverse candidates, and I thought we would just talk about the ways your company recruits and what you've done differently since you began focused efforts to diversify your workforce. And I guess I can start this myself, just talking about what we're doing at the partnership. And we're not proud of the fact that we don't have a very diverse staff, and we are working on that. We have a very small staff, but we have informally, or actually I would say it's more formally now, implemented the Rooney Rule. We won't hire until we make sure that we have good quality candidates of color, and we're working through that. We also, in our most recent rehiring since the pandemic, have invested in a 5-week advertising program with the Challenger newspaper, and we are posting our jobs in the with the HBCU job posting platform. We don't know if that will get us better results, but we're measuring that, and we're trying to do things slightly differently. I think our brand in some ways works against us. People of color want to work for a not-for-profit are going to places like Child and Family Services and other people who are doing direct service. So we're working on that as well to sort of communicate the community value of our brand moving forward. So that's what we're doing at the partnership. Chantele, why don't we start with you about what the way you recruit there?
Sure. So I'd like to say, in terms of DEI or recruiting with a DEI lens, it really is a holistic approach, and there's not just one particular way. And so we rolled out a whole work group to look at our hiring process, starting from application through selection. And so the initial part of that is our DEI committee. Before we post a vacancy, we will review any of the job postings that may have been just sitting around for a bit. We look at the job postings to make sure that there's not any language that would exclude any particular group or that would cause anyone to exclude themselves. And so that's a really important piece to getting folks in the door, because we could talk about where we post job descriptions all day long. But if the language in the job description is one that would cause folks to exclude themselves, then we really hurt ourselves. So that's really important. That's one thing. We've also been really intentional lately about putting our DEI statement on the job description. And I mentioned that when we talk about recruitment, because it's important that as we look to move forward with building environments of inclusion, we want to make sure that we're recruiting people that share those values. And so we're including that statement on our job descriptions as well. We're also looking at our hiring questions. That's really important to make sure that we're not asking questions that could potentially lean towards any particular bias or be biased towards or against any particular group. And so we use the race equity impact analysis to look at our hiring questions as well.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. Danielle, can you take that question as well?
Sure. So Dottie, we have implemented a lot of the same initiatives that you have at Buffalo Niagara Partnership. So we do try to keep a position open until we have a good, diverse pool of candidates. So at least one female, at least one person of color. And we do, again, have that civil service challenge. So we have really bumped up our advertisement when it comes to civil service. We have also put on our website whether a position is competitive or non-competitive, meaning whether someone has to take an exam or they don't, to make it a little clearer, and really try to increase people not only applying to our positions, but taking our exams. So trying to get even more ahead of this than we have in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that. Kristy, I saw you nodding your head when when Chantele was talking. So tell us what you're doing at the bank.
So I would say that I could nod with everybody as well. But so as you have described, we are implementing our version of Rooney Rule, where we are looking for a diverse slate of candidates, for an open position. We're also doing our best to ensure that we've got a diverse panel of interviewers, because it'll help mitigate some of the biases as well, as we're considering different candidates, and it'll bring in different perspectives. Our talent acquisition team a couple of years ago developed an entire diversity recruiting strategy. And whereas we're also implementing behavior-based interviewing and some consistent questioning so that also will not bias some of the questions that we're asking, we've asked our internal employees for help too. And we've done some focus groups to understand what can be better within our recruiting process. We have what we are calling talent ambassadors. We just launched that as a pilot last year, where they're individuals who are helping us identify events that will be impactful in recruiting diverse talent. And not only are they identifying, they're helping us staff them and go out and be literally ambassadors on behalf of the bank to engage more diverse talent. Partnering, as you mentioned, Dottie, with whether it's HBCUs or other organizations, for example, as we're focusing on technology hiring, focusing on the National Association of Black Engineers and being able to tap into talent there. And then employee referrals too. If we have employees who are good and diverse, ensuring that we give preferential treatment to employee referrals so that we can continue to bring in good talent as well.
That's amazing. The business community assessment that we completed in 2020, which we've talked a lot about today, showed a direct correlation between those companies that had an internal infrastructure to support DEI efforts and that they are more likely to set and achieve diversity and inclusion goals. Kristy, I'm wondering if you could speak to that fact through this lens of recruitment and retention. How do you set goals around this, and how does it impact your recruitment and retention efforts?
So we're, I would say, beginning to make a foray into goals, but what we are focused on, and I'll get to the recruitment and retention, is really our employees have told us they really want to be able to see themselves, especially at the senior leadership level, because that impacts so many different decisions, both business and employee related. So in order to diversify the representation we currently have at our senior leadership, we clearly have to focus on recruitment, development, and retention. So we don't set specific goals related to recruitment and retention. What I would say around recruitment is we want to at least match the available talent pools. So whether that is in a particular market for a particular position, or as we're doing campus programs, the representation that is on campus, we want to make sure that we're at least matching that, if not exceeding that. And then as we're looking at development, which really gets to retention, people want to know that they have opportunities, that they can progress, ensuring that our performance management is equitable, so that we are giving opportunities. We're being more intentional with our talent management processes and bringing forward talent that perhaps we hadn't before. We always looked at certain college programs. We have other development programs that we're ensuring are part of our talent management processes as well. And we want to make sure that our retention is consistent. So we'll use our engagement data. We'll just look at retention as well and dissect it a bit, looking at different populations to ensure that they're equivalent. And if they're not, we certainly dig in. And where we have success, we're looking to see what's working as well.
It's excellent. I would just like to invite our audience to submit questions, and we have a couple of them coming across, so that we can make sure we get them answered. But I'll do one more of my questions, then we'll go to the audience questions. So we all know the definition of insanity, right? So Danielle, why don't you tell us what you're doing differently today that you did not do pre-pandemic to assist in your recruitment and retention efforts, and tell us how you believe the pandemic will impact these efforts in the short and long term. This is something that, there's a lot of employers talking about, this issue of remote work and just what the changes in just hiring and recruitment overall. But with this lens we're looking at today, tell us what you're doing differently now and will do again in the future.
Sure. There is so much opportunity out there right now. And I think with the pandemic, and recruitment advertising was sort of heading in this direction for a long time, but I think the pandemic sort of pushed it over the edge in saying that you really have to do more than just advertise a position. You have to get your culture out there. You have to get people to want to work for your organization, not just see an open position. So what we've been trying to do is have more of a social media presence. So not just put a position out there, this is what we have available, do you want to come work here? But posting about, any employee appreciation events, any diversity and inclusion events that are going on, anything new going on within the hospital, people wearing ECMC gear, just things that will promote the culture of ECMC.
Oh, did I lose all the sound, or did we lose her? Okay, we lost you, Danielle. Okay, so Kristy, will you take that question as well? Hear what you're doing
Sure.
differently today that due to the pandemic, and with the Tech Hub. I mean, you all had very lofty hiring goals already, and this, the pandemic hit. So tell us what you're doing differently.
Yeah. So the pandemic had, like everyone, we're adjusting to new ways of working. So I would say the way that the pandemic and the new ways of working have really influenced us, I agree with Danielle, in addition to utilizing more social media from a recruitment standpoint and telling employee stories, as opposed to just, hey, here's the job, like she said. In addition, we're thinking about flexibility and what it means in terms of working from home, jobs that maybe we had said, you're in the office 5 days a week. And now we're taking a look at what jobs will need to be in full time, what might be more flexible, and trying to build some continuity across the organization. In addition, it's where do you work from? We may have hired positions before. We said, oh no, that position is in Buffalo. I'll give an example. We just hired someone about 6 weeks ago who is a more senior position, and he lives and works out of Atlanta for us. And as far as I know, he will be staying in Atlanta, traveling here, of course, when we're all able to do that again. So I think it's about flexibility and understanding the needs in ways that we would not have anticipated 15, 16 months ago.
That's really interesting. We've gotten a few questions here that I'll throw at this group. I'm trying to do them in a little bit of an order here. Chantele, I think it was that you had mentioned that you look at your job descriptions to make certain that that we don't have any sort of unintended consequence of limiting applicants. And so the question is, does anyone on the panel have any recommendations for tools to limit bias in job descriptions and ads? Looking for tools for small companies that are starting their D&I work. Does anyone have any recommendations they'd like to share?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. We use, when looking at our job descriptions and really any written policy or decision being made, using the race equity impact analysis tool. I believe Felicia Beard was on today in one of the micro sessions talking about that tool. And it really is a powerful tool, a very user-friendly and easy tool that an organization of any size can implement to make sure that you're being racially equitable in all of your decision-making and policies. But it's especially effective when looking at job descriptions.
I know that online we have used, there's a gender bias free app online where you can run your description through to see if you have balanced language that's gender bias. It's not really racial equity, but that we have used as well, and it is free. Does anyone else use anything more official they'd like to mention to the group? Danielle or Chris, do you have anything? Should we move on? Okay, great. So Danielle, this question came in for you, but I think it's a good question for everyone. How have you countered any equality versus equity concerns? Oh, I'm sorry, my thing just moved. Concerns in providing targeted professional development opportunities within your organization. So Danielle, can you take that? Oh, we don't have sound for Danielle. Oh, no. Kristy, what about you? We'll start with you while Danielle tries to get her sound working here.
Sure, and that's something that we've addressed really quite recently. We do have some programs that are focused on closing some gaps that we have in terms of representation. So we do have two programs in particular that are open to everyone, but focused on ensuring that we have higher representation from specific groups. And we're trying to educate the organization as the difference between equality and equity, and how equity is providing people what they need, and that we're not taking opportunities away from people. We are being very intentional about who we are trying to support because they had not been supported in the past. So it's an education effort. I think we are seeing some good progress. Again, the one program just launched, but there's going to be concerns. People are assuming that opportunities are limited, but we have an opportunity to really lift everyone up. So that's how we're addressing it.
I think this Kristy, I think you mentioned you like telling employees stories. Did you mention this in terms of how you are promoting the culture of the organization? Chantele, do you all do that as well at Child and Family, or as part of your marketing? Or
yes,
so
absolutely.
There was a question on an earlier session that I didn't get to ask, and the question was how the person said, I want to be able to tell the stories of my employees in my company, but I don't want to come off as it being tokenism or in any way, not respectful. So I guess I'm going to put that to you guys, since you're doing it. How do you manage that within the bank and at Child and Family? Kristy, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. So we're letting the employees tell their own stories, whether it's through communication channels like blogs, or we've launched a new communication channel where we are putting out stories and people can respond and provide feedback. I mentioned earlier the journey mapping process that we have undertaken. We've really moved forward with one of those journey maps, and that's with our Black employees, and they have done they've gone through the interview process and really done some empathetic listening, and they're sharing their perspectives and stories. And in many cases, we're seeing all of us are seeing that the world that we may have known may not be the world that everybody has. And so I can't say that it feels like tokenism. It feels very genuine, but from the seat that I sit in, perhaps, someone might feel that. But what I will say is, because we're sharing more than one, it's broad and representative. We are trying to share multiple stories. So it's through multiple channels.
Thanks. Chantele, what about you guys?
Sure. So I'm not sure. A lot of folks may not know that our Folk School is a part of Child and Family Services. And we just recently launched a campaign, This is Folk. And to that end, it's really telling the story or telling the employee experience. And we certainly have individuals from underrepresented ethnic groups in the video, but they're all different kind of folks that are in the video, sharing their experience and what it's like to work at Folk School and to be a part of the organization. And so I think just tapping into your folks who are there and who've been there and are committed and can tell the story and are committed to your mission, that's how you avoid tokenism. You don't just seek out someone for who they represent in terms of their racial group or ethnic group, but you pull in a variety of folks and focus on your mission.
That's excellent. Danielle, do you have anything to add to that? We were talking, I don't know if you heard the question, but it was just really telling the stories of your employees in terms of promoting your own culture. Is that something that ECMC does as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with what the panel said here. It really is getting the people that have the mission and the values of the organization and focusing on that piece.
There are some real technical assistance questions in here, and I don't know, these might be difficult to answer, so I'll just put them out there. Anybody who feels like they can grab it, raise your hand if you don't mind. So we had a question asking, what are examples of language that would cause someone to exclude themselves from a job opportunity? So Chantele,
yeah, this example is just fresh in my mind. This is something that we just dealt with recently. Something as simple as speaking to a transportation requirement. That's something that's really traditional that we've seen historically in job descriptions, right? But we know that times have certainly changed with ride sharing and increased public transportation options. We know that unless the job really requires for a person to have access to their own personal transportation, that could be very biased and very exclusive, knowing that to have your own personal vehicle suggests something about an individual's economic situation. And so we never want to make that assumption because there's lots of options to make sure that folks are able to get to work on time. And so we really looked closely at whether or not putting something about requirement for personal transportation was necessary in some of the positions that we posted. And so we were confident that will make a huge impact.
That's a great example. And we know transportation is a barrier for a lot of people who are owning a car, as you're saying, and we shouldn't make assumptions. I will tell you, we work with one employer. We do a lot of work with employers in this space. And we work with one employer who had great entry-level jobs that paid $20 an hour, didn't even require a high school degree. But the way you applied for that job was you had to go to their website and fill out the form and attach your resume. And I was like, what 19-year-old kid who hasn't graduated from high school is going to have a resume? I mean, it sounds so, it becomes this sort of false barrier. And I will tell you, through our work, employers are starting to change those behaviors that have some bias in them. So it is. I do think it does require the racial equity impact lens is a great way, Chantele, to structure the conversation around what's in a job description. Danielle or Kristy, do you have anything to add around that question around checking your job descriptions for bias? Danielle, okay.
I can add another thing to that if you want, Dottie.
Go for it. Yes, please.
We're working on with our hiring managers as they start to reframe what they're looking for in a candidate. We throw up these requirements for certain education levels, but what we really want to start focusing on with our folks, if it's not, of course, required by a regulatory body of some sort, what are the qualities that you're looking for versus the things that you can check off in terms of requirements? Like who is the person? What are the needs that you're trying to meet in your program or department versus requiring a certain degree level? So that's something that we're working really closely with our managers to unpack and dig a little bit deeper when we get ready to post vacancies.
That's excellent. So there's a question here about employee referrals. Are you offering a different referral reward for a diversity placement? And I can tell you the partnership, we have a referral reward program that is not tied to anything other than if we hire the person who you've referred, you will get a bonus, because we really appreciate, we have a very small team and they really understand our organization, and we know when they refer someone, they're referring somebody who they really think is going to be good for the organization. But who else mentioned they have an employee referral program? I don't remember who it was. Was it you, Kristy?
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And I would say we're very similar to you, Dottie, that we don't right now have any sort of extra bonus, if it is a diverse candidate that we would hire. But by talking, especially with our resource group members, who tend to be more diverse, and talking about the opportunities for referral programs, plus resource group members tend to be more engaged. And, I think, as Danielle mentioned earlier, can represent the organization well. Like you said, they're going to be candidates that would probably be, of a better match than maybe other candidates might be. So that's really what we're using, the referral program. No extra bonuses at this point.
So there's a question here about, I like the resource groups idea. How would you recommend getting those resource groups started if you're just beginning your DEI efforts? So, and I'm not sure, I know M&T has them, and I don't know if the rest of you do. So Kristy, could you start, and then we can kind of move from there?
Sure. Between what we do at M&T and what I've seen at other organizations, there's a couple of different approaches you can have with resource groups. We've taken a grassroots approach. So if a group of individuals want to form a resource group, we put together all sorts of bylaws at the beginning so that there was some structure around what a resource group would be, sort of what the purpose of the group would be, kind of a bit of governance. But we've allowed the groups primarily to flourish on their own and bring forward their ideas. It's more engaging. It can create a little more challenge because we have over 70 resource groups, and
wow.
In general, they're moving towards some of the same concepts. They're collaborating more. That's the other interesting thing about the pandemic, is because we've been virtual, there's been more collaboration, and we've been able to have, someone in Baltimore join an event in Albany, and someone in Buffalo join an event in Harrisburg. So that's been great. It takes a bit of senior sponsorship to ensure that they have the room in which to operate, but then bringing forward the ideas and putting together what's right for your organization. We've seen other organizations that are significantly more top-down in the way that they manage and run their resource groups, by creating different opportunities for people, but being more prescriptive in terms of what the resource groups should be doing.
Danielle and Chantele, do you have any thoughts around employee resource groups and what you all are doing or not doing, or thoughts before I move on?
We do not have employee resource groups.
So there's a note here about the Rooney Rule, really directed to me, saying the Rooney Rule is tough because you want to make sure you aren't just giving interviews to hit a quota. How are you going through that process so it's fair? And I'll just, again, we have when we are fully staffed, we only have 25 people. We're a very small organization. But what happens is in our organization is everyone's working at full tilt all the time, right? So when a person leaves, there's a real, we need to get someone in this job. And so we haven't, we just haven't had the pool of what we wanted. So the way we are implementing this is you got to keep looking. You can't hire the first person you think meets this job requirement. We really want and need to have more diverse people on our staff. So it's not you did an interview, therefore it's let's keep looking and get the right candidate. And I can tell you the way we've adapted for that is we actually have increased the number of contractors we're using to do work. So we're not feeling this pressure that we have to get a butt in a seat in order to keep the work going. And we're working on developing a bench in that way that's giving us a little more breathing room to really do more thoughtful recruitment and promoting our culture so that we can get a better, more representative group of candidates. So I don't know, Kristy, do you all have thoughts about the Rooney Rule you want to share with our group? So Danielle, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So you have to implement it in a way that works for your organization. So you always want to keep the equity of the position and when you're looking for a specific person in that role, right? So you don't want to ever say, I'm just going to push this person forward, even though they don't have anything that we need, right? So it may just be, let's try some advertising in some different areas, or let's do a little bit more of a push on social media to see if we can get what we're looking for and get a more diverse pool. If you find that the only people you're getting for a position are white males, then you have to do something else, right? You really have to look at your advertising and look at your tactics. So it's a little different. It's not just saying I have to do this and this is what we're going to do. It's finding those quality candidates to push forward as a very good representation of what you want for that position.
Excellent. So we've got only two. Does anyone else want to comment on that before I move on? I apologize.
That's okay. No, that was good.
All right, so we've got 2 more minutes left, and just quickly, I would like you all to put yourselves in the shoes of a smaller, mid-sized company committed to advancing DEI within their organization. What advice would you give them, and to get started to approach building both a culture of inclusivity and a diverse workforce? What is the one piece of advice each of you would give a small or medium-sized company? Chantele, let's start with you.
Sure. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion has a lot of urgency behind it, there is this temptation to just jump in and start doing all the things, right? But I encourage people to slow down and take a step back, and you really have to understand your data. You have to know where you're starting out to know where you're going. And so my recommendation is to really do an overall assessment of your organization, find out what does your leadership look like? What is your staffing makeup at every level? Looking at your hiring, your recruitment data, looking at your retention data. Are you seeing certain groups that are being involuntarily terminated more than others, or voluntarily terminated more than others? And what stories does that tell you? And then looking at how are your employees feeling through both employee feedback or informal conversation. So I think first collecting your information and knowing where you're starting from.
That's excellent advice. Kristy, what about you?
So I'll say ditto to Chantele. I think that's absolutely great advice. And then what I might suggest from an action is aligning what you want to be as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion with your business goals, so that there is the business imperative as well, to speak to the entire organization. And then I would say there are so many different resources. The PwC CEO action on diversity and inclusion is one that comes to mind. begin to peel back the layers around unconscious bias. To me, that's the underpinning of all the work you may do as it relates to recruitment, development, promotion, retention, is understanding what that means and creating a level of understanding. I know Danielle mentioned earlier about unconscious bias training, and we've implemented some as well. And it's in the day-to-day dialogue, because once you create that foundation of language, you can begin to challenge each other to really set the goals and to be able to work towards those. And the other piece of advice I would give, and it's not an action, is just know that it doesn't end. It takes a long time. So to not lose faith in it if you don't have a lot of progress in 1 year, it takes a long time.
Thanks, Kristy. Danielle, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with Chantele and Kristy. I think the one thing that I would add to it is you have to have executive leadership and leadership commitment to it. That's key to this really working and having buy-in of the entire organization. And Chantele, I couldn't have said it any better. You really have to understand where you're at now and have a realistic view of that to know where you are headed in the work that you need to put in to get there.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you so much for your insight and sharing your thoughts and advice with us today. It was some great information we heard from each of you. So thank you for being with us. We appreciate you hitting in the final panel of the day, and thank you for your time and expertise. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as we wrap the day, I will tell you, at least from my perspective, we've heard so many recurring themes around sort of knowing where you're going, measuring where you are, and listening. More than anything else, listening to your employees and telling your company's story. That building a culture of inclusivity is founded in listening and belonging, which is the end game. There were a number of reference materials that were cited here and that we've shared, and we will continue to share those on our website. My last begging for all of you to complete the survey, please do that. This is a journey. We are all on both individually and collectively, and I hope that you will allow us to be your partner in this work as we move forward and share best practices. We see our role at the partnership as really almost like a co-op for employers, a place where best practices can come together in our region and deal with our issues and learn from one another. You probably know this, but Buffalo and this region is still very highly segregated. We have a 90% isolation index. That means if you live in this region, you only have a 1 in 10 chance of having a meaningful interaction with a person of color. We have to work harder, and we have to work more collectively in order to really advance this work. So next year, we're going to repeat that business community assessment, and I don't care about the 72%. I want to see more people more organizations having created some form of an infrastructure, more organizations setting goals for themselves, and of course more organizations achieving those goals. That's how we're going to measure whether or not the work we're doing for you is successful for the community. So thank you all for your time, which is your most precious resource, and for sharing your thoughts and feedback with us as we move forward. And I of course want to end by thanking our sponsors who pay our bills and allow us to bring all of this to you. Bank of America, Delaware North, Highmark, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, KeyBank, and Wegmans as our event sponsors for today's event, and our supporting sponsors, Best Self Behavioral Health, ECMC, Harder, Seacrest, and Emerling, and Key Virtual Events. And I want to thank King again. This is the first time we've done anything on a platform like this, and you all have made it seamless. Thank you also to the Buffalo Niagara Partnership team, who are incredibly committed to this work and the work we're doing on behalf of all of our members to advance equity in our community. Thank you all, and have a fantastic rest of your day, and enjoy the sunshine.